I saw hundreds of faces cheering as I walked across the graduation stage. Except for two. My parents sat in the far corner, arms folded, not even lifting their phones. For years I told myself their silence meant nothing. But when the President of the United States appeared, shook my hand, and whispered, "You make this country proud," the room erupted, and my parents still didn't clap. That moment didn't just sting. It split something inside me wide open. I thought I knew why they treated me this way. I was wrong, and the truth would change everything. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the kitchen as I adjusted my graduation cap in the hallway mirror. The fabric still felt strange against my head, like it didn't quite belong there. I could hear my parents talking in the kitchen, their voices low but clear enough to carry through the half-closed door. "We're only going because it would look bad if we didn't," my father said. My mother's voice followed, sharper than I'd expected. "Brandon is still the one we're most proud of." The words froze me in place. I didn't move, didn't breathe, afraid that if I made a sound, they'd know I was there. My fingers tightened around the tassel hanging from my cap. It could have been a careless comment, a slip of the tongue, except it didn't sound careless at all. It sounded like the truth I'd been trying not to face for years. I turned away from the door, the polished floorboards creaking under my weight. My chest felt heavy, like I'd swallowed a stone. Today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be about me. But as I stood in the hallway, I realized it might just be another day where I'd stand in the background, invisible in my own family. I carried that weight into the car ride. The silence was unbearable. My parents sat in the front, discussing the route to the university. I stared out the window, the world blurring into streaks of green and gray. No one asked if I was nervous. No one asked how I felt. I bit my lip and told myself again that I didn't care. But I remembered. The memory came uninvited. A school gymnasium when I was 10, the air smelling of sweat and floor polish. I had just won first place in a national art competition. I stood on stage with my ribbon, scanning the crowd for my parents. The rows of seats were full of strangers, but the two faces I wanted to see weren't there. They'd gone to Brandon's basketball game instead. I told myself it was fine. I told myself they'd be proud later. They weren't. Another memory. My 18th birthday. I'd planned a small party with my friends, ordered my own cake, even saved up for decorations. An hour before it was supposed to start, my parents called. "We can't make it. Something came up with your brother." I cut the cake alone that night, and then there was the tuition. Brandon's tuition had been paid in full every semester. Mine was a patchwork of scholarships, part-time jobs, and the occasional envelope of cash from my grandmother when my parents weren't looking. I never complained. I learned early that complaints didn't change anything. The car pulled into the university lot. Students in caps and gowns clustered in small groups, taking photos with their families. I stepped out, my gown catching in the breeze, and looked at my parents. My father adjusted his tie. My mother checked her phone. Neither looked at me. I told myself to focus on the stage, the moment my name would be called, the diploma in my hand. But even then I couldn't stop a single thought from pushing through the noise. They won't clap, not for me. As we walked toward the auditorium, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass doors. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, the picture of composure. Inside, though, I was 12 years old again, clutching that art ribbon, wondering why it didn't seem to matter. I found my assigned seat among the other graduates, the hum of chatter filling the air. I scanned the crowd and spotted my parents. They were sitting near the back, not even holding a camera. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to smile at the graduate next to me. He grinned back, his parents waving wildly from the front row. I thought about that little girl I used to be, standing on stages that felt too big for her, waiting for applause that never came. She never stopped hoping. Even when it hurt, she kept waiting. Maybe some part of me was still that girl, stubbornly holding on to the hope that one day my parents would see me. But today, I couldn't put my faith in that. Not anymore. As the speeches began, I sat perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the stage, but my mind miles away. If they couldn't be proud of me, I would find someone who could. I didn't know who or how, or when, but I knew it had to happen. Somewhere deep down, under the sting and the silence, I made myself a promise. This would be the last time I'd stand on a stage waiting for their applause. The next time I wouldn't need it, and maybe, just maybe, that was the only way they'd ever give it. The air inside the auditorium pulsed with energy. Rows of graduates sat shoulder to shoulder, gowns rustling, tassels swaying as the crowd's applause rolled over us like waves. I scanned the sea of faces in the audience and found my parents sitting near the back, hands folded neatly in their laps. No camera in sight, no phone raised, no smile. Names echoed from the stage, each followed by cheers, whistles, and shouts from proud families. When my turn came, I rose, straightened my gown, and began the walk up the steps. The spotlight was hotter than I expected, the kind that made you feel both seen and exposed. Valedictorian, Lila Morgan, the dean announced, and applause thundered through the hall. Applause that did not belong to my parents. I kept my gaze forward, the smile on my face fixed like armor. Then the MC's voice shifted, carrying a note of anticipation. And now, a special honor. Today, the President of the United States joins us to present the Medal of Civic Merit to one of our graduates for extraordinary contributions to the community. Gasps rippled through the audience. I blinked, unsure I'd heard correctly. The curtains parted, and there he was, the president, smiling warmly as he approached. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts, the sound almost deafening. He shook my hand firmly, his eyes locking on mine. "You make this country proud," he said quietly. "Just for me." The applause swelled to a roar. People were on their feet. Somewhere in the chaos, my classmates clapped me on the back, whispering congratulations. But my gaze slipped to the back row again. My parents sat exactly as they had before, still, silent, unmoved. No one in that room knew why I was being honored. The truth wasn't in the program, and I'd never shared it. For 2 years, I'd been working on a water purification project for a small rural town, a place forgotten by most maps. The town's drinking water had been contaminated for decades, and the residents were losing hope. I'd stumbled upon the problem during a research trip and refused to let it go. Late nights in the lab, weekends spent testing samples, emails to government agencies that went unanswered. I did it all in secret, not wanting to hear my parents dismiss it as a distraction. When the pilot system finally worked and the town's water cleared, I felt a pride so sharp it almost hurt. But it was nothing compared to standing here now, the medal heavy around my neck, the president's words still echoing in my ears. And yet, as the cameras panned across the crowd, they found my parents. The image flashed on the big screens above the stage, 2 faces expressionless amid a storm of celebration. The ceremony ended in a blur. I shook hands, posed for photos, and accepted hugs from classmates whose families were shouting their names. My own family didn't move from their seats until it was time to leave. That night, my phone exploded. Someone had posted the clip of the president shaking my hand, and it had gone viral within hours. Millions of views, thousands of comments, messages from strangers calling me inspiring, a real hero. I sat on my bed, scrolling through the flood of praise. You're the reason I believe in young people again. My daughter wants to be like you. Each comment landed softly, like drops of warm rain. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there was a hollow space none of it could fill. My friends texted in all caps, demanding to know what my parents had said, assuming they must be ecstatic. I didn't reply. What could I say? That they hadn't mentioned it at all? That the only words they'd spoken to me after the ceremony were about traffic on the drive home? I leaned back against the headboard, phone still in my hand, and tried to let the kindness of strangers sink in. It did for a while, but every time I thought of my parents' faces on that screen, still cold, disconnected, it stole the warmth away. Then buried among the notifications, I saw a subject line that made my breath catch. Invitation from the White House. My hand shook as I opened it. The message was brief, formal, and impossible to misinterpret. I was invited to a national event recognizing young innovators, hosted in the East Room of the White House. At the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "We encourage honorees to bring their families." I stared at that line for a long time. Family. The word didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. And yet, part of me wondered what it would take to make them want to be there. Not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. The cursor blinked in my email reply window. I didn't know yet if I would ask them. I only knew that whatever happened next would either bring us closer together, or finally prove how far apart we really were. The morning after the invitation arrived, I woke to a flood of new messages. Journalists from local stations, regional papers, even a national outlet wanted to cover my story. It wasn't just the handshake with the president. They wanted to know why I'd been honored. Until now, no one outside the project had heard the full story. 2 years ago, in my sophomore year, I traveled to Pine Creek, a tiny town tucked into the mountains. I was there for a summer research internship, expecting to spend my time taking water samples for a professor's environmental study. But what I found was far worse than a set of numbers on a clipboard. The town's water was brown, with a metallic smell that clung to your skin after you washed your hands. Residents had been complaining for decades, but no one had listened. Kids were getting sick. Elderly residents carried jugs of bottled water home like they were hauling gold. Something inside me locked onto their problem, like a puzzle I couldn't put down. When the internship ended, I didn't. I kept coming back on weekends, emailing specialists, testing prototypes in the university lab at night. I learned to solder pipes, program filtration systems, and negotiate for discounted equipment from suppliers who thought I was crazy. I didn't tell my parents. I'd imagined their response. Why waste your time? Focus on your degree. Brandon needs you to come to his games. I couldn't stand the thought of their dismissal hanging over something that mattered this much. After 2 years, the system was installed. The water ran clear for the first time in decades. The town threw a small celebration in the community hall, with mismatched chairs and a cake that tasted like too much frosting. It was one of the happiest days of my life, and I didn't share it with the people who'd raised me. I sometimes wonder, if you'd quietly saved hundreds of people from drinking poisoned water, would you tell anyone? Or would you keep it for yourself to protect it from the wrong kind of reaction? That question still lingered in my head when I got a call from a TV producer. "We want to do a feature on you," she said. "You, the project, and your family. We'd like to film you together." For a moment, I let myself imagine it. My parents sitting beside me, smiling for the cameras, finally hearing what I'd done. Maybe they'd see me differently. Maybe they'd be proud. That hope lasted exactly one phone call. "We're not doing it," my father said, his tone flat. "Why not?" I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Don't drag us into this, Lila. It's your thing, not ours," my mother added. Something inside me went cold. I thanked them for their input and hung up before my voice could break. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "Brandon, I heard about the TV thing," he said. "Listen, there's something you should know about Mom and Dad." My instinct was to cut him off. We didn't have the kind of relationship where he called to share deep truths. But something in his voice, hesitant, almost guilty, made me pause. "They've been hiding it from you," he continued. "When I started at the sports academy, the tuition was insane. They took out a loan, a big one. Then I got into some trouble, money trouble, and they covered it. They've been paying it back for years." I sank onto the edge of my bed, the metal on my desk catching the morning light. Its gold surface seemed heavier now, like it was tethered to a weight I hadn't noticed before. So that was the reason? They'd poured so much into him that they couldn't or wouldn't invest in me. Was it guilt? Was it favoritism born from debt? The metal gleamed at me as if daring me to decide what it was worth. To strangers, it meant recognition, honor, proof that my work mattered. But to my family? I didn't know anymore. Brandon's voice cut back in. "They didn't want you to know because, well, they didn't want you to see how much they bet on me." My fingers brushed the metal's cool surface, and a thought settled in my mind. If this was what their loyalty looked like, maybe I needed to start defining worth for myself, without their ledger hanging over my head. Brandon's voice grew heavier as he went on. "They're not just in debt because of tuition, Lila. They've been protecting me. Or at least, they think they have." I stayed silent, letting him fill the space. "2 years ago," he continued, "I got caught in a betting scandal. Some of the guys on my team were placing illegal bets. I didn't place any, but my name got tied to theirs. It almost went public. Mom panicked. She was ready to sell the house to make it go away. Dad pulled every string he had. They borrowed even more money, and they never really recovered from it." The words landed like stones in my stomach. I thought about the endless sacrifices I'd made for my own goals. Late nights, skipped meals, extra jobs, and how none of it had required them to save me. My victories had been mine alone, but Brandon's mistakes had become theirs to carry. And now I understood the unspoken equation. My success might have looked like his failure. If I outshone him too much, maybe they thought it would crush what was left of his confidence. I leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes. For a moment, the anger softened. I could see them again in a different light. My mother's tired smile after working double shifts. My father rubbing his temples in the kitchen but still asking if I'd eaten. I remembered overhearing them whispering about bills late at night, voices low and strained. It didn't excuse the years of indifference, but it complicated them. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. I glanced at the screen. White House Protocol Office. My heart jumped. The message was short, official, impossible to misread. "We have booked round-trip airfare for you and your family to attend the National Innovators Reception. We look forward to welcoming all of you, all of you." The phrase made my chest tighten. I imagined walking into that room with my parents beside me. For the first time in years, I wondered what it would feel like to be seen. Not just by the world, but by them. That evening I called them. My voice was steady, though my palms were damp. "They've invited us all to the White House," I said. "Flights are already booked. Will you come with me?" There was a pause on the line, long enough to hear my own breath. My mother finally said, "We'll talk about it." "Let's have dinner tomorrow," I suggested, "before I leave." The next night, we sat around the same dining table where I'd eaten thousands of silent meals. My parents on one side, Brandon next to me. The air smelled faintly of roast chicken and something I couldn't name. Maybe unease. "I don't need you to be proud of me," I began, the words surprising even myself. "I just need you to be there, physically there, standing with me. Because I've spent a long time doing things alone, and I'm tired of pretending it doesn't matter." They looked at each other but said nothing. Then Brandon cleared his throat. "I need to say something." His voice wavered, but he didn't look away from them. "I know a lot of this is because of me. You've done everything to protect me, even when I didn't deserve it. But Lila deserves your support. She's earned it more than anyone I know." The room went still. My mother's fork clinked softly against her plate. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I glanced between them, waiting for any sign. An apology, an agreement, even a nod. Nothing came. The silence stretched until it felt like another wall being built between us. I set my napkin on the table, pushing back my chair. "Tomorrow's the event," I said quietly. "You'll have to decide if you want to be part of it." Their eyes followed me as I left the table, but no one called me back. Upstairs in my room, I zipped my suitcase, the metal resting in its box at the top. I didn't know who would be standing beside me when I walked into the East Room of the White House, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let their absence define me this time. The White House was even grander than I had imagined. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that looked older than the country itself. Guests in elegant suits and dresses milled about, the air thick with polite conversation and the faint scent of polished wood. I stepped into the East Room, my heels clicking against the floor, scanning the crowd instinctively. No sign of my parents. My chest tightened, though I told myself not to be surprised. They'd had their chance. The program began, a host at the podium, introducing honorees one by one. I smiled and applauded for others, all the while bracing for my name. "And now," the host announced, "please welcome Lila Morgan, recipient of the Medal of Civic Merit." I started toward the stage, and then movement in the front row caught my eye. My parents were there, both of them, sitting together, leaning forward. As I took the stage, they rose to their feet, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. For a moment, the sight almost undid me. My vision blurred, not from the bright lights, but from tears I couldn't stop. Their eyes were locked on me, and for the first time there was no hesitation, no indifference, only pride. The president shook my hand again, and I managed to keep my composure through the short speech. But when I turned to face the audience, the only faces I saw were theirs, illuminated by the warm glow of the chandeliers. After the ceremony, we gathered in a quieter corner of the reception hall. I still hadn't found words for what I'd just felt when Brandon leaned in, lowering his voice. "I have an idea," he said. "Something that could change everything for us." I raised an eyebrow. "Change everything how?" "Let's start a scholarship fund," he said. "In your name. For students who've been overlooked, like you were. We can put money into it every year. I'll donate part of my earnings. Mom and Dad can help. Maybe even some sponsors. We could turn your story into something bigger." The idea was so unexpected I didn't answer right away. I glanced at my parents, half expecting them to resist, but they both nodded. My father even smiled faintly. "It's a good idea," he said. "We can do that." We spent the rest of the evening talking through the possibilities. How we could launch it, who we could help. For the first time in years, we weren't dancing around silences. We were building something together. A week later, back home, I found a thick envelope in the mailbox. Inside was my printed thesis, pages worn at the edges. A note was tucked inside in my mother's handwriting. We read it together. "You're remarkable." I stood in the driveway for a long moment, the paper soft against my fingers. My parents had never once asked about my thesis while I was writing it, but now I realized they had gone back, read every word, and, apparently, told their friends. That evening a neighbor stopped me to say, "Your parents told me all about your work. You've made them proud." It wasn't the kind of grand apology I dreamed about. It was quieter, smaller, but real. Then, just as I was beginning to believe the new chapter in our family story, another message appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "International Youth Ambassador Appointment." The body of the email was crisp and formal. I was being invited to represent my country at a global summit on sustainable development, all expenses paid. I'd be traveling for months, speaking on panels, meeting leaders from around the world. I stared at the screen, the weight of it settling in. This wasn't just another recognition. This was an entirely new horizon, one that might pull me even farther from home just as things were beginning to heal. The official appointment came with a navy blue folder embossed with the presidential seal. Inside was a letter welcoming me as an International Youth Ambassador for Sustainable Development. The itinerary alone felt like a dream. Panels in Geneva, workshops in Nairobi, a youth conference in Tokyo. The first time I stood at a podium overseas, the microphone catching my voice in a language that wasn't my audience's first, I felt a familiar flutter of nerves. But as I began telling my story, of Pine Creek, of late nights in the lab, of a medal heavy with more than its own weight, I saw faces leaning forward in recognition. They didn't need to share my hometown or my struggles to understand the feeling of being overlooked. Over the next months, I told that story again and again. Sometimes to small rooms of high school students, sometimes to cavernous halls packed with world leaders. Each time I adjusted the ending, letting it be not just about me, but about the people I'd met along the way. The families in Pine Creek now drinking clean water, the students who wrote to say they'd started projects of their own. My family followed the journey from home. I'd send them photos, and they'd send short messages back. "Saw you on TV again. You looked confident up there." It wasn't the effusive praise of some families, but it was consistent. It was something. When I returned between trips, the scholarship fund had become real. Brandon had spearheaded fundraising events, and my parents had attended everyone. No speeches, no spotlight, just their presence, their quiet work. I realized that for them, this might be the most honest form of pride they could give. We began to collaborate more closely. My father handled logistics for events. My mother coordinated with local schools to identify scholarship candidates. There was no longer a comparison hanging between me and Brandon. Instead, we worked as a team, each with a role we'd chosen, not one assigned by history. One afternoon, after a long meeting with the funds board, I found myself in the kitchen alone with my mother. She was chopping vegetables, the rhythm steady and unhurried. "You've been traveling a lot," she said without looking up. "It's part of the job," I replied. She paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "We didn't understand before what you were doing, why it mattered to you. I think we were afraid of losing you, even before you left." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was close enough. I reached for a glass of water, giving myself a moment before I answered. "You didn't lose me," I said quietly. "You just weren't looking in the right direction." She nodded, and that was the end of it. But in that nod, I felt something shift, something that didn't need words to be real. The months blurred into a rhythm: travel, speak, return home to help with the fund, plan the next project. The more I worked, the more I realized that the people who once doubted me weren't my enemies. They were simply limited by the shapes they'd learned to see. And sometimes, those shapes could change. One evening, I stood in front of the scholarship recipients. A dozen young faces lit by the soft glow of string lights hung across the community center. They each held an envelope with their award. My parents and Brandon stood in the back, watching. When I finished my short speech, they clapped, the same warm, unhesitating clap they'd given me in the East Room. Later, after the crowd had thinned, I stepped outside for air. The night was cool, the sky clear. I thought about all the stages I'd stood on, the rooms I'd walked into, the people I'd met, and I thought about the little girl I'd been, standing alone on a gymnasium stage with a ribbon in her hand, wondering if anyone was watching. I could see her now, and I could tell her, "They will clap. It may not be today, and it may not be in the way you expect, but it will happen, and when it does, it will still matter." The next day, I boarded another plane, this time to a summit in Cape Town. I was scheduled to deliver the closing remarks. Standing backstage, I looked over my notes one last time, but I already knew how I'd end. When I reached the final page of my speech, I let my gaze sweep over the audience. Some were smiling, some looked tired after days of panels, but all were listening. "I want to leave you with this," I said. "Sometimes you have to hear the applause of the world before you hear it from your own family. And that's okay, because both kinds of applause are precious, and both can shape who you become. What matters most is that you keep stepping onto the stage, whether or not you think anyone is clapping." The room was silent for a heartbeat, and then the applause rose, loud and sustained. Somewhere in the crowd I imagined my family's faces, not as they'd been in the back row of my graduation, but as they'd been in the front row of the East Room, standing, clapping, proud. As I stepped away from the podium, I realized the story I'd been telling all along wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever felt invisible, everyone who'd kept going anyway. And in that realization, I found something better than closure. I found a beginning.